Bella has been with me now since probably October last year, September, October last year. She's with me, she looks after me. Since she's come into my life has changed dramatically. I heard about the program Integra were running with the service dogs while I was in the public service at Russell. They brought some dogs in there. Always wanted a dog. I'm from the country originally, country boy. My wife, very apprehensive about that because she comes from a country where the dogs let loose as pups when they're not wanted and they pack and kill people, unfortunately. So it was a struggle to get her to understand, but Bella come to us, and after about 3 days, my wife sort of fell in love with her, and it's history now. It's a bit of a battle. Bella's for me, but it's a bit of a battle with my wife because she's changed the family, actually. Like my son didn't like dogs either, and now this one has changed the whole perspective of the family. So Bella's 4 years old. She come to us from the guide dogs. She was a terrible word. I don't like the word reject. She was didn't suit the guide dogs. She has a condition where she has allergy, so a blind person can't see when she starts to itch, so she has to have side point injections every 4 to 5 weeks. But as you see her here is as you get her. She's very placid, sits down next to me. Watches. Overnight she's great. Overnight I have a lot of bad nights with dreams and nightmares, and she will wake me up. She'll sit up and poke me with her nose and say, sort of, "Hey, are you all right?" And if I go out to sit in the lounge room, she comes with me. So, cannot say how much she's changed me and how I am and what she's done for us as a family. She's a Lab Retriever, and they've just got the most beautiful nature. She's just adorable. I was born in Cowra in New South Wales. I spent most of my young adult life in Canowindra, which is about 20 k's from Cowra. My father was a shearer. I left school after year 10 and decided to get a job because if I didn't have a job, Dad said I had to go back to school, and I didn't want to go back to school. So my first job I did was out in far northwest New South Wales shooting foxes and trapping rabbits. Did that for 6 months, and I come back and I worked in shearing sheds for a while with my father, and I was had a job on a property in Canowindra, and then just before I applied for the army, I was driving headers up through the middle of New South Wales up into Queensland, and the word come through that the army had accepted my application. So it was in the middle of the really bad drought. It was 80, 82, 80, 81, 82, and I thought, you know what, I'm going to give the army a go. So I did. I joined in November of 1982. And as a young guy from the country, never been to the city and that, it was a bit of a daunting thing, but looking back now, it was the best thing I ever did. I did have family in the military. I had a great uncle that served, he was in the Second World War. He was in a German prisoner of war camp. I've still got all these documents. And I had another uncle who was in Qaeda, was in up on Uncle Jack Pollard. He was with the AIF up in New Guinea. So I had sort of ties, but it wasn't something I thought about until I thought, what am I going to do with my life? And I saw the recruiting, the advertisements. I thought, what have I got to lose? Give it a go. If I don't like it, I come back out and do other things again. Obviously, the military's not for everyone, but I fell into the space and I enjoyed it. Obviously, you enlist in Sydney at, I think in them days it was Liverpool Street. You had no concept of the city. City wasn't somewhere I'd ever really been. Got on a bus. From the second you got on the bus, obviously, like most people probably do, they start yelling at you. Arrived in Wagga. I knew I was going to go to Wagga. Well, then you do the 13 weeks in Wagga, and the cliche, it either make you or break you, I think, is one of the best cliches you could use for that place. I fell into it pretty good because I was used to being told what to do. Dad, when I say told what to do, I always did what my parents told me. I think the people who had their own way in where they come from found it a lot harder than what I did. But I just rolled with the punches, I just wanted to get through there. And the best way to get through there was to do as you were told, stand attention when you're told, salute when you're told, and get on with it. And that's what I did. And 13 weeks later, after being there, you walk out of there and you end up with some good mates that you've got for life. And I still, one of them was my best man at my wedding, and I was his best man at his wedding. And from the minute you walk in, you build a camaraderie with a number of people. When I joined, it was a bit different. I think now, well, I know now because I was in recruiting for a while before I left the public service, it's you call recruit. When we joined, you went in, you did your psych tests, you did all your aptitude tests, and then they would come back and say to you, these are the trades you can apply for, not necessarily get. Obviously, infantry is always the one that they want to get people into. I wanted to go to engineers, actually, because I'd driven large-scale machinery on the land. I thought that might help, but I ended up in transport and large-scale machinery. I ended up as a terminal operator in Sydney. It was my first posting after I did my initial employment core training down at Puckapunyal, where you do your driver training and that. But my actual trade that I was allocated was a 171 freight handler. Look, Somalia was... I always say this to people, Somalia was the best deployment I ever did. The reason I say that, it was because we were such a small contingent and we were so tightly knit and we looked after each other. At the same time, Somalia was probably the worst place I went. Of all the places I went, it was probably the worst living conditions. I don't hide the fact that I don't have a love for Somalia. I don't have a love for the Somalian adults. The kids are what I saw as the victims in Somalia. We looked after an orphanage in Baidoa. We used to go up there and spend time with the kids. And you're seeing kids. I come home from Somalia and I said to my kids at that stage, you kids whinge about not having a PlayStation, or you whinge about not having this, you whinge about these kids wearing the same clothes they wear every day. They had limited food, shelter over their head, no education, and being looked after by people who were all about themselves and not about the kids, really. It was what was in it for them. I remember we took a heap of stuff, a Hercules load of clothes and toys and that up, and they didn't want to give it to the kids because they were getting nothing, the adults. So, Somalia was a strange place, and I look back at it now and I wonder, other than lots of money being spent there, what we achieved. And I especially as the United Nations, I don't think we achieved anything really, because it's back to what it was. An achievement to me is that a country changes, or the environment changes for the better. Well, I haven't seen any of that happen there, and unfortunately, while we went in there with the best intent and we did our job, the best we could, and we did our job, very proudly and looked after did what we had to do to try and make the operation work, and we were very good to the people. You knew that because when we went to Baidoa, they used to say to us, they knew about the I think it was 2RAR was up there, and they used to say, "Oh, we love Australians, because Australian servicemen are very empathetic to people. I really mean that. When we go somewhere, we have empathy for people, and we don't want anything from the people. We're there to help the people. So that was a very proud thing for us, I think, as Australian service people. servicemen there, ADF men and women, where while we may not have achieved the end state, we achieved the daily state of trying to do what we could. And you can only do so much as a 67 people in an environment where it's so harsh and hostile, and and you're dealing with things that you'd love to fix but you can't. The big thing with the briefs, we were told, you win over people through hearts and minds. To coin the phrase, if you flog a dog, the dog may do as it's told, but only through fear. Whereas if you train a dog and you treat a dog well, the dog will do what it does because it loves you. Now with people, it's no different. If you go into a country and you put the hard fist down, like we've seen some people do, if you go in there with empathy and with you want to win the hearts and minds of people, and genuinely make them understand that you're not there to cause them grief, you're there to help them, then that's how you win over places. You don't win over places by going in and aggressively trying to get your point across. There's a time for aggression, there's a time, and Somalia was a place where it was a real, you had to juggle it, because the people who were coming in to, we had Somalis working for us who were coming in and leaving their AK-47s and their machetes and everything at the gate when they come in to do work for you. And they were, reasonably nice people, they'd laugh at you. But at the same token, you went out into Somalia in the middle of the night, and we didn't, but if you did, they're highly likely the same guy's going to kill you. But you treat people with that empathy and with that, we're here to help, as I said, and that makes them understand, hopefully, that what you're doing there is for the good of the country, not to reap the country, if that makes sense. Look, we were told, some of the stuff we were told, that we were going to go in there and there was going to be, hell and fire, if you want to put it that way. Well, we arrived in Timor. The Timorese were very, very, like that. They wanted us there. You could tell they wanted us there. And we arrived in there, and a majority of the issues had been pushed out of had left the country because they heard we were coming. There was still some of the remnants of the Indonesian forces. TNI was still there around the airport where we were and that. But for me, Timor was pretty benign especially compared to Somalia. There were elements of the ADF, I'm sure, that found it to be not to be benign, but it was sad because the stuff that happened in Timor post us arriving, the atrocities was really bad. And everywhere you went, you saw the results of that. But the heartening thing about Timor was, they love, again, it's funny, they loved Australians. When they heard, I recall speaking to my translator. I had a translator, and some years later, while I was working in IPDIV in the public service, I spoke to him again. He was still working for the DCP program in Timor. Carlos, his name was. And I remember him saying to us, "You stay, don't let the UN in." They had a real thing about the UN because they said the UN will just drop everything and run when things happen. Australians come in here, they don't want anything from us, they're just helping us. They don't try and push us out of our houses, they don't try and make their life... we were living in hutchies at the airfield, and we treated them again with respect. Hearts and minds, treat them with respect. It's no different to you and I. They do a good job, you say thank you. You build that trust with people, and I'll be the first to sit here and I'll say it day in, day out. there may be elements of the ADF that don't do it, or individuals in the ADF is a better way of putting it. But I would say that most people in the ADF are doing what they're doing to try and make things better. And they want to work, they want to make things better for these people. And to do that, you build trust with people. You know, if I want a good relationship with you, I build trust with you, you know, and you see me and you say, yeah, I can trust you, you know. I know you're going to do what you say you're here to do. So, yeah, look, Timor rolled on. Saw a lot of stuff in Timor, good stuff in Timor, loved Timor. Timor's a great country. You know, I went all over Timor. You know, I went to Bacau, went to Vikeki, I went to Suai, went up into Belabo. I was in Moliana sometime later. Went down to Akusi. It was just a job I was in that I travelled around Timor, and everywhere I saw the Timorese, they were just nice people, trying to live life, and they weren't violent or they weren't totally different environments to Somalia. Somalis were very, very aggressive. I found the Timorese to be very passive, very, very, very friendly, and just wanted to help. I went into Timor as the WO2 movement operations. I was at the airfield to start with the det at the airfield, and we were doing the coordinating the movement of troops, cargo, vehicles in and out of the airfield, and through Timor, out through Timor, they'd come into us, and then we'd put them onto different modes of transport to get them, on the LCM-8s and the aircraft and C-130s to move them around the different locations and through convoys. So a lot of the stuff I did, I went to check on debts that I had around Timor. We were instrumental, our guys were instrumental in moving the first major load of relocation or repatriation of Timorese who had run from Suai across to Dili, because when everything happened, they all converged on Dili. A lot of them converged on Dili. If they weren't up in the hills, they were in Dili, and they were living on the port or at the airfield. So we'd use the Jarvis, HMA Jarvis Bay, the Fast Cat catamaran, and we did the loads of the people to relocate them back around to Suai, so they're where they come from. So that was a really big it was a real boost, because you're seeing people go back. It's like someone come in and wiped out Canberra, and you're coming back, you've been away from your hometown for months, and all of a sudden you're back, the smiles on the faces. So that was a really good thing. It was pretty bad. So it was probably one, that and down on Bacau, from Bacau down through the coast, it was probably the real areas where they did the most damage. But it was enlightening to see how the people reacted when they got back there. For them it was sad, but at the same time they were home. I come over from Somalia, and my then wife, I've had three, I'm my third wife, that's not unusual in the military, but she said to me, you're different. Now, you will never believe yourself you're different. It's a human nature thing to say, there's nothing wrong with me. But as time went on, and you have debriefs and sort of things, but you come home and you're coming from an environment where you live, breathe and ate in the pockets of people. You had a purpose. I mean, you genuinely had a purpose, both in Somalia and Timor. You had a purpose to be there. You come back, and I remember the one thing I thought about, you come home and someone goes off their nut because there's not a box of pens in the cupboard, and you think to yourself, get a grip. You just don't understand what it is not to have something. So that was probably the big thing that I identified, was the fact that what someone here in our country saw as a catastrophe was a joke. Whereas you've been in places where you get a guy, and I slipped to Somalia, I had a lieutenant from Botswana come in one day and he said, "Oh, Mr. Chris, I need to get some water to my troops." "Oh yeah," I said, "No worries. How many days water they got left?" He said, "None. They've been without water for 2 days." Now this is in a country, in a hostile, that's in drought. And out at Balladera, it's just clay pan. And they had no water. So had to drop everything. Luckily we run U3 Air, which is the aircraft. We took pallet loads of water out. That's a tragedy waiting to happen, no water. A box of pencils not being in the cupboard is not a tragedy waiting to happen. It's we're going to buy a box of pencils, or a box of pens. So your whole perspective on what is critical, what is urgent, what is a tragedy changes big time. And urgency, sense of what is urgent, what is not urgent. Someone not having a bottle of water, 20 bottles of water, they've only got 3 left to drink is, we need to supply them. Someone having no water and have had no water for 2 days is an urgent matter and the prospect of tragedy because you die of thirst. I always had the opinion that if they were going to send me to Somalia, Timor, Iraq, Afghanistan to do my job that I'm paid to do, I'd prefer to do that than to go to Shoalwater Bay for 5 months. Because Shoalwater Bay, I'm still away from family. I'm living in crappy conditions in the dust, and I'm seeing the same place over and over, whereas I'd quite willingly go anywhere to see something different. I believe majority of people in the forces are hooked like that. It's at purpose, but unfortunately also there's that element of money. People got to the point where it was about money, I didn't get to go there and you got all these allowances. Well, I used to say to people, take the allowances off me, and I mean that, take it off me, send me there, give me my field allowance, take tax away from me because I shouldn't be taxed, and I'd be happy to be there. I don't need another $200 a day or whatever it is to be there because I'm paid to be a soldier. I'm paid to go where my government tell me. That's, sign that dotted line and give an oath. That's what you're doing. It's like saying a fireman needs to get more money because he puts out a fire. So I had a different perspective on that, and I used to use that when I had deployments going for my troops, because people were all too willing not to go to Shoalwater Bay and find every reason, but as soon as a deployment come up, they were happy to go. So that's just me, but I have this thing. So, but I would say predominantly, when you've been somewhere and you've done what you're trained to do, it's a good feeling. And that doesn't necessarily mean you're killing people. Like we're all trained as military to pick up arms and fight, but just when you're doing the job you're paid, moving things, getting things to where they need to be, making sure people can survive and do their job is a good feeling. What we do works, and if it doesn't work, we need to identify what happened that it didn't work and fix that. ...2001 was a big year for me. I did infantry minor tactics. Then I went to exercise 10 of Thunder Bay or 10 of thrust in Shoalwater Bay. I come out of there and I got put on a plane to go to Christmas Island where the Tampa arrived, the child overboard stuff happened. So I was sent across there with the logistics element to do the movements and control movements in and out of there. I did 4 weeks over there. I came home, I got off a C-130, drove to Ryde and had a phone call to say, leave your bags, pack your gun to Nauru. The following morning I flew from Australia to Nauru and I was across there with the engineers to build it's not a concentration camp, to build the camp, holding camp I'll call it, for the people on Nauru. I was there for, I think it was 2 weeks, 2 and a bit weeks, and I had a phone call. I hadn't even seen what happened in America, and then I had a phone call to say, you've heard about September 11th? And I said, no. And then we saw it on the news and they said, pack your bongos, you're getting on a plane with some people and you'll meet a major there, and away you go. So I ended up in Perth, did 2 months training with the SASR, doing their weapons and bits and pieces. And I was on the advance party with the advance party into the operational area. We went in on the 23rd of November, I think it was. No, it wasn't. Correction, 21st of November, the advance party flew out from Perth into Kuwait. And I was supposed to be with the task force for 4 months, and I ended up 8 months without a break, because when the changeover time come, one of us had to stay, and my marriage had broke down, and they said to me, "What do you want to do?" And I said, "I'll just stay. I've got nothing to go home to." So I did 8 months. I was in Kuwait doing the intermediate base stuff there, but I was flying in and out of doing reruns into Bagram. So, yeah, that was an interesting time. I arrived in Kuwait. I got thrown a set of keys to a car, and they said, "Go and do your job." First day I went to do my job, I got lost and ended up in an area in part of Kuwait that was not the area to be at the time. I got escorted out of there by a Kuwaiti captain and pulled up on the side of a highway, and he said to me, "Don't ever go back there." He said, "You've just gone into the home of Qaeda. This part is known for Qaeda." He said, "You're lucky you even got out of there." So I learned a lesson there. I was a lone operator in the coalition area there for a long time in Kuwait, and if it wasn't for the US, I wouldn't have got a lot of things done. Now, again, it's about building relationships and building that trust in, because a lot of people, a lot of the coalition forces, everyone thinks the coalition was just like, bend over backwards to help each other. Yes, to a degree, no to a not. Then again, at the same time, no. I went down and spoke to my counterparts, the 99 Novembers, which is movers, US Army movers. And through the rapport I got with them, at the drop of a hat, I could get a forklift, I could get a truck, I could get pallets, I could get what I needed, because I didn't have it. Australia in that whole thing was like a pin drop in the ocean. To get our people, to get our fighting force into Afghanistan, the work that took to get them onto aircraft, because you got to remember, the Americans were moving their stuff in there at 100 miles an hour as well. So we had to fight, to get them in. And, I can remember standing at the Air Force Base in Kuwait, Ali Al Salim, and I've got a line of LRPVs with our Special Forces guys waiting to get on a plane. The plane was sitting on the tarmac and it was churning and burning. I mean, it was running because it was hot ops. And I've got this American standing there saying to me, "Sorry, you haven't got authorisation to come onto the base." Now, you're sitting there and you're thinking to yourself, you're kidding. And I lost it. And I said to this bloke, "You know what?" I said, "We're not here because we wanted to come and have a party. We're here because your president phoned our Prime Minister and said, 'Come with us. Come with us and fight terrorism.'" I said, "So here I am with our Special Forces guys who want to get in there and fight terrorism, and you're telling me I can't come onto your Air Force base. You get the clearance, son. I don't give a crap. You get the clearance." I said, "If I can't get the clearance, I'm going to ring my government and get them to ring your president and tell them what's going on." I said, "This is rubbish." So there was this big moment of silence, and he was standing there shuddering in his boots because I'd sort of been a bit hot on what I just said there. I was physically yelling at him. So next thing you know, the gate opened and he said, "Yeah, okay, bring them on, but my commander wants to see you tomorrow." I said, "Oh, thank you, I don't care, I'll see your commander tomorrow. Rat's ass, I'm here to do a job. And we're here to bleed with you, so don't stand in my way." So we got him on the plane, and the troops finally got onto the plane. They went in, and the next day, I got fronted to this airfield commander, this OC, and he wanted to rip me. Proceeded to go off at me, and I just said to him, "Listen, mate, you don't want us here. Just give us the word." I said, I'll go back to my operative now, I'll go back to Australia and I'll ring them and say, "Listen, the Yanks don't want us here. You either want us here or you don't want us here. Which is it?" The agreement was we'd come in, we don't have our own assets to move stuff around. You said you would provide that. You tell me what you want. So myself and the major ended up getting a pass, and we had a pass to get on and off the base to get our stuff in and out of Kuwait into Bagram. So whilst, yes, we were a coalition, at the same time, you wonder sometimes about Big Brother. Not that they're in line with us, but we forget that they're trying to look after themselves, and then we come in and we want to be looked after as well. Sometimes you just got to force the issue. I flew into Bagram, and we took a load of pallets in, myself and another guy, and the guys there were on the airfield. They had an area, like a little compound with barbed wire around it. To the back of the compound there was a barbed wire fence, and I remember the kids used to come, the locals used to come walking through this area, and I said, "What's the deal?" And they said, "Oh, well, there could still be mines in there, but the kids seemed to know where the mines were." And they used to want the dollar, the US dollar. Bagram was in a valley, big valley. There were still MiG jets there that had been left by the Russians. The story I heard was that before we got there, someone had climbed into one of these MiG jets and pulled they'd never been decommissioned, and pulled the ejector thing, and apparently it ejected him, and that was the end of him, because they're designed to eject in the air, not inject on the ground. And I don't know who it was, but whether it was a rubbish story or whatever, but it would make sense because stupid people do that kind of thing. But I spent that time. I spent 3 days there, and of a night you'd sit there and it'd be sort of dead quiet, and you'd have a lot of time to think about stuff. But the day we were leaving there, it was like, I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Platoon, and when they're walking across the hill line and the lightning was in the background and they were singing. We flew out of there and it was a severe storm, and the planes used to sort of circle around to get out of the valley, and that was to do with the so they were less of a target for missiles. And it was just like out of a movie. You're sitting there, there was only 2 of us on the plane, and 2 pallets, and it was a C-130, and we ran out. It was sort of raining. We ran out, and there was the lightning and the thunder, and I got on the plane. I was sitting there, and I said to the other guy that was with me, I said, "Jesus," I said, "this is just like out of a movie." Bagram, other than that, was a cold place in winter, hot place in summer. I remember the guys coming out of the hills with their fingers black, or starting to go black from frostbite, sores and that on their face from the cold. And again, you talk about urgency. We were told we need basically 10,000 Mars bars and Coke. Now, in anywhere else, you'd say you're joking, but you got to remember these guys were operating in a area where they needed high sugar intake, and the best way to get them high sugar intake was chocolate and Coke. So we ran around. I remember going every shop in Kuwait finding Coke and pallets of Coke and Mars bars. and we go back to in Australia, someone said to me, "Oh, I need a box of Coke," right, whatever. It was an urgent thing. These guys were living under conditions, the Special Forces guys were living under conditions that most people wouldn't even want to think about, let alone be in. So those kind of things were important, very important, to the morale, to the welfare, and to their ability to do what they need to do. So you drop everything and just go and do what you need to do. It's, I equate it to very much like Saudi. I spent 4 years in Saudi, and you go through Saudi and you go to the empty quarter, which is just thousands of kilometres of desert. But then there are other parts of Saudi where they grow oranges and mandarins, where they grow roses in the highlands. So it's rolls of sand, then there's mountains of rock, there's green valleys every now and then. Biblical would be, it's something you see in a movie, like in the Lawrence of Arabia, isn't that, that kind of stuff, where it's just, but at the same time, a lot of these countries also remind you of Australia. Everywhere I've been in the world, I've walked into a place and it's reminded me of Australia. Something as silly as, like a rock face or whatever. You just look at, oh, shit, I saw that I've seen that out around Pilbara, So, the world is a funny place where you go somewhere expecting to see something different, and sometimes you just see the same thing. My role, predominantly, I work with the military, and they were another group that, you talk about coalition and that. So to get into the airfield in Kuwait, you had the international airport and you had the American air base and Kuwaiti/American air base. And everywhere the Americans go, they sort of take over the military side of it, and for a better word of the expression, they like to make the people think that own the airfield, they've still got control of the airfield, but the Americans sort of have their dominance. But what I found was there were two ways to get into the airfield. You could go down Wolf route, which was through the Americans, and you'd get, as the expression goes, the rubber glove to get in there. Or you could go through the Kuwait gate and get the wave. Now, to get the wave, you needed to get into the mines, Heartland mines of the Kuwaiti. So when I first arrived there and I found out they had a entry, I went down there and I took down some food and some bits and pieces, and I knocked on their door and I spoke limited Arabic, and these guys spoke limited English, but we sat down, and I suppose within the space of a few hours I'd built a rapport with those guys where what I needed from the Kuwaitis I got. And that was just through hearts and minds stuff. So I'd go in there and they'd give you 50 cups of coffee and their dates, and you'd be walking into a room and you had to cut your way through the smoke, because they all smoke. And you sit there and you just babble on bullshit to them. Little bits of Arabic, little bits of English. So whenever I needed to get onto that airbase really quickly, I could, because I'd circumnavigate the Yanks, because quick wasn't the word the Yanks understood. This is a funny story, actually, about getting onto American bases. Camp Doha, which was in Kuwait, I had a young corporal working for me at the stage. Him and I had been to the airfield, and I hadn't been to bed for about 3 days. And we were tired. And we come back, and to get onto Camp Doha, first you got to a gate and you had to show them your ID. Then the next was a mirrored pit where they checked for explosive devices. Then the next was you had to get out and they checked for explosive devices, plus they put the dogs through your car and they checked you and they checked everything. So of a morning to get into this place, there's a lot of civilian Americans that worked there as well. There was a line-up and we were coming back from the airfield. It was probably about 6:40 in the morning. We got through the first gate. We got to the mirrored area, and then there was a big hole up where they started doing their checks. Anyway, we both fell asleep. The last thing I remember was the music on the radio, and I said something to Mick, and then apparently all the cars were gone from in front of us, and we were there sound asleep in the car. Well, the next thing you know, the door flew open, and I've got a 9mm pistol at my head, screaming at me to get out of the car, and I really crapped myself. And this guy, get out and get on the ground. So me on the ground, they zip tied us. And I said, mate, what's going on? He goes, what were you doing? I said, obviously I was asleep. And he goes, why? Well, mate, what kind of a stupid question is that? I'm tired. I haven't been to bed for 3 days. So they sat us down and they brought the car down. They went through the car and he said, you're in big trouble. The commander of the base is... And I said, mate, you're some words I used. I said, mate, you're a joke. You're going off your nut about two people that are tired and fell asleep. Oh, you could have been terrorists. And
With Americans?
Yeah. And anyway, I had to ring the XO, and I rang the AOC and I said to him, this is where we are. And he goes, yeah, I haven't got time for jokes. I said, I'm not joking. We're locked up at the front gate. So the XO had to come down, and she just stood there and shook her head. We got locked up because we were asleep. And I said, when's it a crime? And as we were leaving, I said to this guy, you and I are going to cross roads. I said, you made a real dick of yourself today, but that's all right. What goes around comes around. And I got him back a couple of days later. Those kind of things. These are the kind of things that people don't see in the, sitting at Christmas Day, I was waiting for an aircraft in 2001. And I sat all day from 5 o'clock in the morning till 23:59. All day at the airfield. No food and nothing to eat. We scavenged what we could eat, and we had hot water, and the plane never ever turned up. But no one told us. So, this is military. This is what you do when you're in the military. This is life in the military. So, you can get upset about it, but don't get upset about it. Yeah, it happened. It's part of it. Just happens. A couple of days later, we had trucks that were coming in to pick up some stores to go out to the airfield, and they refused to let the drivers drive the trucks in, which were locally employed people. And I said to him, mate, this is all... I went over and he goes, oh, it's you? And I said, yeah, it's me. And he said, this isn't happening. And I said, mate, this has all been arranged through the provost marshal. And he said, well, I'm telling you it's not happening. I said, well, I'm telling you it is happening. He said, well, they're not driving in. So we had to actually physically drive the semis in, which was wrong anyway, but we did. We drove the semis in. When I got the semis inside, I went down to the provost marshal, who I knew really well. She was a really nice lady, and I knocked on the door. It was midnight, and she said, oh, what's going on? I told her, and she said, is that right? So following day, that guy was gone. Apparently he'd been making trouble. So she said, really sorry about what happened, because it really caused a lot of dramas, because then one of the guys drove one of the trucks with the brakes on all the way out, and it was just a nightmare. But he was gone the following day. When we were in Somalia, we used to get a 6-minute phone call once a month, satellite phone call to your family, and mail. And when I say mail, letters and stuff like that. And even then, there wasn't a lot of internet. When we were in 94, wasn't a big internet time. Then Timor changed with the introduction of the postal service, where you got your family could send you a 2 kg post, which was good, and that sort of got better and better as deployments went on. So, you went from limited interaction with Australia, especially your family. Interaction with military went along by and by because it just happened. You had the comms, but it was your family and your loved ones that sort of, that was the big disconnect in the early parts of deployments. But as time went on, it got better. So Timor got better. Even when we went into Afghanistan, Kuwait, we had better comms and better stuff because we could tap into the Americans. They had internet cafes and stuff you could use. And by the time I did my last deployment to Iraq in 2006, where I was actually the postal woe post, I was the OIC postal, you had communication with your family and with the people you need to be in contact with was pretty much a daily event. And that helps because, you don't feel dislocated from the country and from your people, from your family especially. For me, I didn't have any family at that stage. From 2000 through to when I got married to my second wife, I had very limited, apart from mum and dad. So it didn't impact on me, but it does impact on guys that have got young families and newlywed and all that kind of stuff. The interaction with home, and that can cause big trouble. It's hard. If you've got, especially kids, like people with kids, it was hard for them. So, but I think as much as some people will say, we couldn't get the internet every day and all this kind of, think back to when, I used to say to people, guys, go back to Vietnam even, or they were lucky to get mail, let alone anything else from home. I said, so, let's be honest about where we're at in time. So, I think that was the defence were very cognizant of the fact that breakdown of communication is a lifeblood for both military operations and family. When I joined the Army, you didn't question what you were told, you just did what you were told. And the reason you do that, and the reason they train you like that, is because when things are trumps, without saying that word, when ships are trumps, there ain't no time to question. You just do as you're told. Now, the rationale of it is, these days, people are encouraged to question, one might say. Now, there's a time to question and there's a time to do as you're told. What I found was, it got to a point where there was more questioning than they were told. Now, the military is not an area where I believe people need to be questioning every 5 minutes. So I saw from my time in the military, when I first joined, as I transitioned through the military, I would never in my days walk into anyone's office when I was a junior soldier and start demanding something. But I had someone walk into my office once and start demanding everything. And they were told to do an about face and get out. And when they wanted to have a bit of respect, come back. So I think there are, and it's a societal change. It's not just the military, it's everything. So I think that as time has transitioned from when I joined, things have changed dramatically. Whether the people are better equipped, better trained, far be it for me to say yes or no to that, or that they are or aren't. What I would say is I just hope that people understand that the reason the reason we have a military and the reason we act like a military is because when the time is needed, there is no time to argue. And the greatest of people will say, You can sit back and make a decision or not make a decision, but you either make a decision or you don't make a decision. If it's a good decision or a bad decision, it's a decision. And if you don't make that decision, especially as someone in the military, especially when you're leading people, then either way there's consequences. And you can't, we never know whether it's going to be the right decision or not. But you've got to make a decision and go with it. So people today are more inclined to question, I think, rather than just do. So, and again, not casting dispersions, I just think it's society overall. If you look at society, I think that's the way our society is now. I just don't think at times that's what the military needs. I did 30 years in the Army. I loved the Army. I still love the Army. I follow it and what's happening with it. I like to think that defence is a positive thing in the Australian community, or seen as a positive thing. I think we do a lot of stuff, or we've done a lot of stuff now for the community. We've done a lot of stuff for the country. The last thing I would say is I would just ask that the same people that send us to places and ask us to put our life on the line in defence of our country or in defence of a greater good, that when they do that, they understand that sometimes post-decisions of what they make can dramatically influence veterans. So just be aware when you do send us places, or when you do send, not me anymore, but when you do send these young men and women to do what you've asked them to do, don't throw it back in their face with some of the decisions you'll make later. Because I would ask, would you put your son or daughter in that position? So, but you know what? The world is what it is. There will always be military, there will always be conflict, and we can only hope that the Australian Defence Force will continue to be the 100% best it is and has been in my time anyway.